And Moses said to the people, "Fear not, stand firm, and see the salvation of the Lord, which he will work for you today. For the Egyptians whom you see today you shall never see again. The Lord will fight for you, and you have only to be silent."
Good morning, Lakewood. Hope you're all doing well. Now, when I applied here, I said I could preach, but I never told you I could preach well, okay? So keep that in mind. Don't get too excited. But rain or shine, I am excited for today. I am excited to kick the series off this week. In our sermon series, we're looking at the different turning points in all these people's lives throughout the Bible. And I am so stoked to have gotten Moses, because it's such an intense story. Specifically, Moses as he parts the Red Sea. This moment is actually not just a turning point in Moses' life, but honestly probably in all of world history. Because this is the moment, this is one of the big moments that God showed himself to Israel as a God that fights our battles, that fights their battles. And it's just so intense, like I said. I mean, just imagine with me for 1 second, okay? You see Moses and the Israelites, and they're on the banks of the Red Sea, and they're trying to figure out what they're going to do. Whenever they see the Pharaoh and his army, and they're running towards them, and they're freaking out, and the Israelites, they cry out to the Lord in what seems like fear, and they cry out to Moses in what seems like anger. And Moses replies with this baller line. He says, "Is it up? There we go. Nope, not yet. Don't look yet." He said, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm, and you will see the deliverance of the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Which is such a powerful line. Oh my gosh, it is such a good line. It is this line at which God does a mighty thing for Moses and the Israelites and radically shows them that he is the God that fights on behalf of us, that he will fight on behalf of Israel. But you know those moments in movies where they have that like super intense moment and you just don't really have any context of what's going on and you're getting invested just by how strange and intense it all is, and then it fades to black and it says 3 weeks earlier? I think that is the dumbest movie trope ever, and I hate it. Every time it comes on the screen, I will stop watching the movie if I see it, okay? But I do have to apologize because I'm about to do that very same thing, okay? So don't pull a me, don't check out, all right? I promise it's worth it, but you have to understand how great this line is through the context and the buildup of the entire story, okay? So follow with me. We're starting at the beginning, all right? Exodus 1. The story of Moses is just so crazy wild from start to finish, right? We pick up in our story, we see Joseph, son of Jacob, actually Jacob's favorite son. He's chilling in Egypt, and he has brought all his brothers, his sisters, his father, and his wives into Egypt because there was this intense famine going on, and they could get the care they needed in Egypt. So they all moved there. Well, a lot of time has passed, and the Pharaoh that Joseph was friends with has long since died. Joseph has long since died, and so much so that this new Pharaoh doesn't even really care about what Joseph did for Egypt and how he helped. He doesn't really see Joseph and his family as help at all. And so he enslaves them because he starts to fear the size that the Israelites are growing into. They fear that it's going to be a threat if the war were to break out. So he enslaves them. But the Israelites, they keep growing despite the slavery that they're in. Then a decree goes out that all Hebrew boys are to be killed, and just to try and keep population down, which was really dark. Don't know how they came to that conclusion, but that's what Pharaoh did. And then Moses shows up on the scene as a Hebrew boy in this time, and his mother loves him so much, hides him away, puts him on the Nile, and sends him down where he is picked up by Pharaoh's daughter. The same man's daughter who wants him dead now has to raise him. And in an act of God, she hires Moses to raise him. And so he gets to go back with his family. It's very, very cool to see the power of God. So now Moses is not only safe, but now he gets to be with his people while being raised with the education of Egyptian royalty, which is super important. So lock it in your brain for later. We're going to hit back on that. In sort of a time skip fashion, the story just kind of jumps to Moses being older now. We see Moses go out and he sees an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, and Moses, being the righteous man he is, wanting to protect Hebrews, he kills the Egyptian. He kills him. He thinks he got away with it, but he didn't. Once he finds out that he's in trouble with the law, he splits town and leaves. He flees to Midian. He meets a woman. They get married, and he works as a farmer for his father-in-law. I just want to pause just for a second, okay? The amount of just absolutely crazy, insane things happened in one man's life. And literally we're 3 chapters into Exodus, okay? Moses' life path goes from pointing in one direction. Like he's going to be a slave to Egypt, and then again he goes to being royalty, and then again he goes to a murderer, fugitive, turned farmer. And that's the man that God meets. A man whose life is just filled with instability. And I just think there's something about that. Next, where we see Moses is when he encounters this God of his ancestors, who Moses has probably heard about because he was raised in a Hebrew household, but Moses probably didn't know much more than that, okay? They didn't have the Bible like we have the Bible. It was probably just word of mouth that he knew, all these stories that he heard from his ancestors. And so now this is a huge moment for Moses as he's face to face with this God that he's probably heard about how he's blessed his ancestors, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. He's face to face, he sees them, and I imagine it's this big, personal, intense moment as he can see clearly that all the stories he heard were true. He says, Moses, God says to Moses, I need you to return to Egypt to lead my people out of oppression from Egypt and into freedom. And I love what happens next in the story. Moses tells God, he says, God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt? Which is a valid concern. I mean, the dude just murdered someone, okay? But God's response is what makes it so great. He says, and I will be with you. This Bible verse goes on. If you're looking at it in your text, it goes on. But I want to stop right here, and I just want to look at the only words in this first part that God really offers for comfort. That's it. He just says, I will be with you. God's message to him isn't, oh, hey, Moses, like, no, you're good. Remember, you got that Egyptian education. Like, you're good. You're probably one of the best people for the job. He doesn't say, no, I even let you be raised in a Hebrew household. Like, you know how to talk to the Israelites. You're good. No, he doesn't say any of that. The only assurance that God offers to Moses is that I am with you. See, the story of Moses is one where we can see that God is who he has said he is. He is a God that will fight for Israel and now us. And there are things that God asks of us, and some of you may know what those things are that God is asking of you, but you're not sure how you're going to do it. But just know that the only thing you need to get through it is the presence of God, because ultimately it's not you doing it, it is by God's hand. So stand firm in knowing the Lord fights our battles, and God asks us to stand in the middle. God is with us as he stands in the middle of our battles. It is his hand that causes a victory. So trust in the Lord that fights your battles. Moses now, he goes to Israel and is like, hey, God sent me. He's heard your cries. He's showing up, so don't worry. And he's here to free you. And they start to rejoice. The Israelites are so happy, which keep that in mind, those dirty Israelites. Keep this in mind, okay? They said they're so happy. They start praising God. So Moses goes, and he gets up, and he goes to Pharaoh, and he tells him to let God's people go. But he doesn't. Pharaoh doesn't. And instead, he gets mad, and he makes the Israelites' job even harder. This is where I get upset. This is where I get upset in the story. They go from rejoicing to being angry with Moses, like in a heartbeat. Like Moses, like leave, okay? Like none of that ever happened. Oh my gosh, they're annoying, but it's fine, it's fine. They go from rejoicing to being angry with Moses, and Moses immediately turns to God and says this. He says, why, Lord, have you brought trouble on these people? Is this why you sent me? Ever since I went to Pharaoh to speak in your name, he has brought trouble on these people, and you have not rescued your people at all. Imagine the utter patience of God that he has as he sits here being accused of not loving his own people as he's planning to do it, as he's working already. And I partially understand the faithlessness of the Israelites. I know I roast them a little bit, but I get it a little bit. I'm not justifying it. I just understand it. I mean, think about it. These guys have been enslaved for a long time. They finally get a little taste of freedom, and then it feels like it's getting taken away and they don't know what to feel. But Moses got the up-close vision of God. He got to be personal with God. Moses was close enough with God that he talked to him like you would with a person sitting right next to you. And he has the audacity to sit there and accuse God and say, God, why have you led me here? To accuse God of not being good. But I cannot be too hard on Moses. Because I know, and I know I'm probably not alone in this, that some of us have also questioned the goodness of God when we face trials, tribulations, and battles in our moments of weakness. C.S. Lewis, the guy who wrote Narnia, big name in the Christian faith, wrote another book called A Grief Observed. It was about the passing of his wife and all the things he was struggling with in that. And in it, he says this line, "Not that I think I am in much danger of ceasing to believe in God. No, the real danger is in coming to believe dreadful things about him. The real conclusion I dread is not so there's no God after all, but so this is what God is really like." C.S. Lewis, a huge name in the Christian faith, struggled with the very same thing that Moses and some of us in this room have probably struggled with before. We lacked faith in knowing the goodness of God, but I am grateful, though, that our God is a good God, that he is a God that is abundant in steadfast love. See, God could have looked at Moses and his questioning, and he could have said, I am good, yet you dishonor me, fight your own battles, and left. But he doesn't. He assures Moses, he says, listen, I provided for your fathers, I have cared for them, and now I fight for you. And then he says this line. Sorry, I'm a little behind. Therefore say to the Israelites, I am the Lord. I will bring you out from under the yoke of the Egyptians. I will free you from being slaves to them. Our God is still faithful to deliver us, even when we are faithless that he will. If God's work in your life was contingent upon the amount of faith that you had, then I think we all know we are in a lot of trouble. But we can trust the consistency at which God is present in our battles, because God still fights even when we think that he has left, that he will not show up. He has every time before, so why would we think that he's going to stop now? God fights our battles, and we can trust that. So for this last bit, we're going to do a bit of a speed run through the middle part of the story, okay? I wish we could stick through it. It's a great part. It's actually crucial, but we have to keep going. We would be here forever if we did not. Next, we see God uses Moses, again, to go to Pharaoh. He asked him to go to Pharaoh again and again and again to tell him that God has commanded for the people of Israel to be let go. And Pharaoh says no every time. A plague happens, and then Pharaoh says, psych, and then makes the Israelites get back to work after kind of like promising that they could leave. Over and over, again and again, until we get to where Moses gets to this last plague. He goes before Pharaoh one final time, gives this last plague, and then Pharaoh finally relents and lets the Israelites go. And like I said, I really do hate that I had to skip over this last part, because it really is such an important part to this story. This should be the part in the story in the lives of the Israelites where they could point to and say, oh, this is how our God has waged war against Egypt to let us free. But they don't. The Israelites leave Egypt, but before they can get too far away, Pharaoh does what he's always done through the story this whole time and says, wait, never mind, let's go get the Israelites. So they're running out, I'm sure chariots, whatever Egyptians have, I don't really know. They're going, they're doing their thing, they're chasing after the Israelites. And the Israelites find themselves, what we talked about in the beginning, trapped between the Red Sea and Pharaoh and his army, and it's coming in, and they're freaking out, they're terrified, and they cry out to God, and just fear. It sounds like they did not think God was going to provide. And they turn to Moses in anger, and they say this line, they say, was it because there were no graves in Egypt that you brought us out to die? What have you done to us by bringing us out of Egypt? Didn't we say to you in Egypt, leave us alone, let us serve the Egyptians? It would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the desert. And what's so crazy about to me about the scene is this is the last time, the last time we saw Moses confronted, he kind of like cowers to the Israelites. Like he's kind of like almost like on their side against God. But here we kind of see this whole the whole thing change when he says this line. He says, Moses answers the people with full confidence that God is going to provide for them. And he says, do not be afraid. Stand firm and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Egyptians you see today, you will never see again. The Lord will fight for you, but you need only to be still. From this story, from my looking at the story, trying to understand where Moses went wrong, I think the sin that he struggled with the most is that he lacked faith in God and he was afraid of the Israelites. He sided with them way too much. He never seems to show all that much fear towards the Egyptians, like when he's coming back into town, but it's like when he's questioning God, why should I do this? Why do you want me to do this? It always seems to have to do with the Israelites. That's why when he looks to the Hebrew people, and with all the confidence in the world, he tells them that they're going to be fine because God is going to fight for them. This is the turning point for Moses. Moses has seen the mighty hand of God parting the Red Sea, but I fully believe the Red Sea was more of a turning point for the Israelites than it was for Moses. Because Moses has already seen the Lord work. He's already seen the Lord work to deliver his people. And here we see God do what Moses already knew was going to happen. God delivering them from Egypt by parting the Red Sea. Now, I'm kind of nerdy. I love these random Bible facts. They're my favorite. If you have any, please tell me them. Best way to my heart. But did you know that Exodus was like what the death and resurrection of Jesus is for us in the amount of significance? And here's what I mean by that. We say that if Jesus never rose from the dead, then there's no point in us being Christians. Paul says it. I'm not a heretic, guys, okay? Don't stone me. But for the Hebrews, if the Exodus never happened, then there's no reason to be Hebrew, okay? Because this is the event. This is the event that showed that God fights for Israel, that God fights for them through the literal deliverance from slaves to free. And I love the parallel here to the New Testament. Because Christ has delivered us from slave to free, but not from Egypt, from the bondage of sin. Moses' confidence came because he saw God at work as he delivered them. And our confidence today comes that God will fight for us is because he's already delivered us. From slaves to sin, of being free in Christ, you are made new. And that is the biggest way he could have fought for you. So what makes you think he's going to stop now? Because he literally already has. God will continue to fight for you, and you can trust that because he already has. Will you pray with me? Dear Lord, I thank you so much for being a God that despite our times of faithlessness, you have stayed, you have fought for us, and you have shown us your love. Lord, might we stand firm in confidence at whatever you have put before us, knowing that you are present. And that is the only thing that we need to get through it. It's in your loving name that we pray. Amen.